Okay, welcome, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen of all ages, to another episode of the Regeneration Podcast. I'm Michael Martin, here with my partner, Mike Sauter. How's it going, Mike?
Good. We're looking at, I think you posted a picture on a Twitter feed, if not other places, of snow in your region. I think we were just about a day behind. We didn't quite get the what my uncle calls white poison, but it was threatening. And now we're in upstate New York. You wouldn't want to be at any other place in the globe. If I could show you what I see outside my window, it would blow your mind in terms of foliage and hills in the Finger Lakes region.
Yeah, same here, which is weird because yesterday all week was miserable, cold and wet, and I couldn't go out and take care of the cows. It was not fun. And then this morning I went out to take care of the animals, and there was ice on the water. And now it's almost 70 degrees.
God bless you.
So
Good.
Yeah. So yeah. And the other thing, what else the other? So I was having allergic reaction, not a bad one, but to I sampled a metheglin I made, which is a mead flavored with herbs, but I flavored it with juniper berries and spruce.
Juniper bushes make me itch if I touch one.
They do. Yeah. But so I sampled it when I was racking it a little bit ago, and then I tested the alcohol content afterwards. 16% alcohol. So
wow, how you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good.
All right, ready to rock and roll.
I only had a little bit. So anyway, we're here to talk today to our guest David Bentley Hart, who needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. I first encountered David's work, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when I read the introduction he wrote for Vladimir Solovyev's The Justification of the Good. And soon thereafter, I bought Beauty of the Infinite, which is an important work, I think, for this project of reimagining what theology and religious philosophy could be. And then, over the years, I've had the great pleasure, and I mean pleasure in the purest sense of the word, of editing 3 of David's books on behalf of Angelico Press, a publisher we both share. And the first one was, I have so much in common with David, I think. It was the Dream Child's Progress, which is a collection of essays. And I realized then that, I know David's brother Addison a little bit, and I could tell the love for Lewis Carroll, which has been deep in me, exists in David and his brother. And then I can only assume for David's case, because I know it's true for Addison, that extends to the Marx Brothers. Is that correct, David?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the Beatles.
My list of the 3 greatest human beings were, of course, Jesus, Groucho, and Frank Robinson.
I'm with them. I'm
I
with
know
you
there are
there.
others. There are others who should be in the list there as well, but sometimes I just like to summarize.
That's a good start. That's a good start. And then the second book I edited of David's, or copy edited, it was his, best-selling Roland and Moonlight. And it was such a pleasure I laughed out loud, I don't know how many times. And I think probably the most luminous moment for me editing their book is the part where I think David's having a dream and he sees Roland as a Buddha. I was like, this is the best book that's ever happened to me. And I got paid to read it. And then last but not least.
To be specific, I imagine him as the Buddha delivering the Lotus Sutra on Vulture Peak.
That's right. It's so perfect a moment in literature, and so imaginative. I mean, the whole book is just a pleasure to read. And then, interestingly enough, so about a year ago this month, I submit my book, Sophia in Exile, was published by Angelico Press, and
I'm seeing the themes already.
The first essay in there is about Gnosticism. right? And it has the hymn of the pearl as a theme in that first essay. And then right after that, our publisher John Reese sent me David's Kenogaia, which he asked if I would give it a look and then give it a copy edit afterwards. And I told John, I think it's brilliant. I think it's the best thing David's written. I can't wait till it's published, so I give it to my kids. And David's book also is based on the hymn of the pearl. So welcome to the show, David Bentley Hart, and thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Good. So tell us what is your history with the hymn of the pearl, first of all, that compelled you to write a story about it?
Oh gosh. I probably was an undergraduate when I first read the Acts of Thomas. Yeah, I mean, I think I must have been an undergraduate. And of course, the Acts of Thomas is one of the more impressive works of early, if extra canonical, Christian literature. Obviously, it has themes that would be broadly called Gnostic in it, but again, there's a certain vagueness to that attribution, and it's kind of hard to locate within the work itself which particular supposed schools or tendencies that indicates. But fair enough, if we use the term Gnostic as a general designation for a certain style of speculation, that it fits in it. But anyway, the Acts of Thomas as a whole is impressive literarily, and it contains a few poems, one of which is the Hymn of the Pearl, which is one of the genuinely impressive literary artifacts of those early centuries of diffuse Christian sects. I don't know. I mean, it stuck with me, of course, because it does. For one thing, of course, I asked myself why the Orthodox canon can't have more fun literature in it like that. But just that's okay. Put it in the realm of fantasy fiction by call it fan fiction, on the part of early Christians. But also because obviously it like so much of what we call the Gnostic mythos, which has to be distinguished from the Gnostic texts, some of which are fascinating, some of which are incredibly tedious.
Yeah.
It does capture a kind of pathos that I think is recognizable. It sticks with the sense that we all have at times of being out of place in this world, and suspecting that our true story is one that has been told elsewhere. And for that reason, I think it stuck with me. I mean, and I, in fact, once in 1992, I think, while I was waiting for a friend whose plane was very, very late, I wrote a kind of children's fantasia narrative verse version of it out, that parts of which turn up in Kenogaia in the transitions between, well, there are 8 parts to the book. So.
Yeah. And yeah, so those or your versions of the poem. So those were not translations, but versions, would you say, or were they translations?
Well, I mean, it's call it straight. I mean, there's nothing. Every episode in the poem and most of the imagery is taken from the original, but obviously arranged over a larger span. But yeah, it was. I never even went back and polished it properly, but it's. I thought it would be nice as a sort of children's narrative verse.
It is beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And picked up some. The original is very beautiful in Greek, and well, I suppose it's beautiful in Coptic. My Coptic is rougher, and so I really don't have a literary sense of what constitutes good Coptic.
Okay.
But I've always thought that in general translations could have tried to capture something more of its visual image, something more of its beauty.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of being an undergraduate and reading this, for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I've been assigning the Hymn of the Pearl to undergraduates, because I think it perfectly captures, among other things, where they are. You're sent into the land of Egypt. Don't eat their food. Don't you'll become like them.
It's funny, yeah.
Right?
It's very much also a common theme in fairy tales,
Yeah.
or of course in myth. Persephone eats the pomegranates of Hades' realm,
Exactly.
so can't escape. But in a lot of fairy lore, you eat the fairy fruit, the fairy food you forget,
Yeah.
Or you can't leave that realm again, and so yeah. But it's a wonderful poem, and it comes from a period before it became the habit of Christians to denounce one another for.
I like that. I like that rendering of that. Before it became commonplace and like in our blood to just run everybody down. Yeah.
I keep getting accused of heresy. Even of course, the Thomists, especially these days, tend to accuse me of heresy.
Me too.
But what's funny is I often get but I get accused of heresy just for repeating things that church fathers said, because you see, Thomists don't actually tend to know much about Christian tradition. They don't. They just know Thomas. So if they come across a formulation about the relationship between God's freedom and creation, for instance, that doesn't fit the Thomist model, the first thing they do is squeal heresy at you.
Yeah.
I mean, did I say squeal? That makes them sound like pigs. I'm sorry. I meant to say squeal.
Sorry. Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah,
go on.
I don't get perennialism either. So if you could give our audience maybe a little overview of what the book is about, what happens in the book, without giving away too many things.
Well, see, this is the thing, is I use the book to be a commentary and a satire on just about everything. So it's set in a world called Kenogaia, not Kenogaia, because it's an epsilon.
Okay.
Kenogaia. That is literally a clockwork universe. I mean, it literally is built from springs and gears and swinging weights by a demiurge. And in this world, a young protagonist, or two protagonists, Michael and his friend Laura, and it's a world that's authoritarian, where there's an official religion that's a kind of curious combination between deism and early modern mechanistic metaphysics, but enforced by the most draconian, if incompetent, means. And into this world comes a visitor from beyond, called Oriens, who reveals that in fact this world is an artifact of a sorcerer, created principally by the abduction of his sister and the use of her dreams to fabricate the world. And the rest of the book that follows, on the one hand, is Michael's quest to rescue his father from the authorities who come and arrest his father early in the book, but also the quest to set free this visitor's sister. I don't know what much. I mean, in a sense, the plot simply is the plot that almost inevitably follows from using the Hymn of the Pearl. It's about someone who goes, although rather than from the perspective of the one sent out, it's someone who journeys from his kingdom into the alien land where something precious has been stolen that must be rescued and restored. And the book follows from that. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, because I actually think it's fairly cleverly put together, if I do say so myself.
It is. It really is. And my 13-year-old son Gabriel would vouch for you. And I asked him if he wanted to ask you any questions. He said, no, just tell him I love the book. But the one thing he did say, I said, what did you think of the book after you finished it? He said, reminds me a little bit of John Masefield's The Box of Delights. Do you know that book?
Oh yeah,
David?
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know the Box of Delights well. Yeah.
And I read that to the boys maybe a year ago.
And does he know the Midnight Folk as well?
I don't think he knows that one. I think.
Okay, well, that you see, there are two books with K in them. One is the Midnight Folk, and the second one is the Box of Delights.
And the thing is your book is the kind of rollicking, fun adventure that Masefield produced here, and I.
Well, that's
it was. I mean, it's a
flattering comparison.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad you like it. So what were the influences for you? And I know you've been writing. You've been turned to writing fiction a lot more lately.
Well, that was always more my inclination anyway. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that Kenogaia is not actually all that necessarily indicative of the sort of fiction I would normally write. I can explain how I came to write it in a moment.
Yeah.
But if I'd had my druthers, I mean, early in life, I have like a collection of letters from editors saying, "I love this. It's wonderfully written. I don't know how to fit it into our list." So I, and the books of theology and philosophy and essays sold, so they became how I made a living. But if I'd just been left to my own devices and desires, it would have been all fiction and poetry and very little else other than the occasional literary essay, just to show off as much abstruse and recondite learning as I could pack into it. After all, one tries to evoke awe.
That's right. Well, I think you're. As I told John when he sent me the manuscript, I said, "This is brilliant. This is something we haven't seen in literature for a long time. It's so refreshing."
But influences. I mean, I don't know how you can say it. I mean, I love children's literature. I love literature in general. I mean, but the thing is, I don't draw distinctions of genre because, to be honest, there are bits in it that probably are Wind in the Willows, Alice in Wonderland, Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah. But
also bits that are W.S. Gilbert and farcical literature, and other bits of it that are probably Proust and Nabokov. My great lodestone, my favorite 20th century authors.
Wonderful.
I'll interject to say at one point I wrote down. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry.
I wrote down some influences that were coming up with me. It felt like reading it, David, that a shovel was going into the ground, and all of a sudden, all these different themes, like the use of memory. But I was thinking there's a great Peter Beagle novel, The Last Unicorn, that uses memory so well. I wrote down Cervantes. At one point, when I think Oriens was talking to Dr. Axiomorpha, I wrote down something reminded me of Solovyev's short history of the Antichrist. At a certain point, Don Quixote was right there, and I was just kind of taking notes, and I'm going through my phone. Certainly, I heard Persephone. I heard Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah, that's clearly
clear. Yeah. But I just kept on writing notes. But what I loved about him,
the myth in the book that's recited by Michael at some point about
absolutely
the Aurea and Argentia, the two moons or the two celestial sisters, and how one was taken into the underworld by King Thonos, King Hell. But anyway,
right.
So yeah, obviously I was drawing on that.
Yeah, and the use of memory again, that so crucial. I just was thinking it's so needed. It's so needed at this time. Very feminine, a powerful force. If you'd speak to a little bit of the use of memory in that novel.
Well, wait a minute. Let me say.
Okay.
Let me name one more obvious influence that shouldn't go overlooked because it's so obvious that it's likely to get overlooked. Is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
Yeah.
It was actually also another. Perhaps the most famous, crypto-Gnostic children's novel of the last century was.
And which was, I missed it when you said it, Dave.
The Little
upon
Prince.
descending to
Oh yeah,
glory.
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah,
Little
yeah,
Prince.
yeah.
Memory. Well, I mean, there's Roland in the background. There's a line that Michael's father is credited with at one point that I wish, gosh, I should actually have had a copy of the book here. Is that myth is the true, if symbolic, memory of the immemorial. History is the false, if factual, memory of the unforgettable. I think there are levels of memory in all of us. I think that accounts in part for our dream life. I mean, we have the memories of the empirical ego, but I think we also remember something more than ourselves. That memory is also immediate. And I've always loved Augustine's treatment of memoria because it has this wonderful depth to it that memory isn't simply recollection for him, it's the totality of the mind, even in the way in which the mind transcends its finite psychological history. And that's why God is always in memory. To retreat into memory is to find the place where we all began. And it's interesting, like Meister Eckhart will speak of remembering his first beginning in the Godhead, not meaning thereby that as a psychological personality, he can lie down on the therapist's couch and call up a recollection of him as Meister Eckhart, rather that the memory, that the realm of memory is a realm of truth that, when explored, far exceeds the finite boundaries of our psychological histories. And so I think in the book, I don't know if this is what you were talking about when you asked the question, but there is this strain, which Oriens keeps saying, this is your story as well. The story I've just told you about myself is true of you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could but remember, and there's a scene, again, I don't want to give away too much when there's a bird in the book that talks. But in order to avert something terrible, confronted with a great sort of monstrous possibility, what rescues them is the bird repeating, remember,
Yeah.
where you, and of course this was the old, and again, this seems to me to be something that has to be written into the very fabric of spiritual beings, or the life of spiritual beings. It's not something strange and perversely and threateningly Gnostic when you have these claims that, what is it? What is the knowledge you seek? Whence I have come, right?
Right.
Whither I am tending, In fact, there are three there. Who are,
Yeah, who am I?
Yeah. And in fact, those are the three questions, the magical questions that in the story of Aurea and Argentia, the younger sister has to answer in order to liberate her sister from the underworld. So I'm assuming that's what these.
Yeah. And I was thinking, even as you were talking, why I felt so compelled to ask you about memory. I remember, but the where I come from, I remember Leon Bloy. He wrote, that the Immaculate Conception. He was saying, a divine sap escaped from Eden, and you get this sense that it came up through the generations. And America's kind of lost its way in many respects. And I once wrote an article at this Front Porch Republic, but it was published over at First Things, just on their blog. But it was me reflecting on a chapter in Christopher Lash's True and Only Heaven about the difference between nostalgia and memory in American culture. A really brilliant chapter. And wondering, again, we're dedicated to the Immaculate Conception, that there's something about America and bringing into the Catholic or the Orthodox faith a much more pronounced role for memory, and that's just, I spoke pretty incoherently there, but it's just kind of, to read about it in your book, it just brought all this stuff up. It seems so powerful, right?
Of course, that's sorry to change my these glasses are granny glasses, I know,
I
but
like
they're
'em.
actually better for the distance I am from the screen.
Yeah.
If I could, what I want a round one so I could look a little bit more John Lennon-esque. No, that just looks too stupid. Sorry.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
It doesn't. Yeah, it had a Roger McGuinn vibe going down.
Well, there's a reason why the central rite of Christian worship is correctly called anamnesis, as well as anaphora. It's a calling back into the present or making present. But it's funny, the act of anamnesis, as you know, no doubt, because you know the Orthodox liturgy, the act of remembering becomes an act of remembering not just the past, but the future, because you remember the second coming.
John Zazoulis, I recall, called the Eucharist at one point a definition. He said it's a memory of the future.
Right.
Yeah.
Which gets into certain other books I've written recently, which were also denounced as heretical by the Thomists. I really wish Thomists would actually learn something about Christianity, because I don't know if the Thomist Christian dialogue can make any progress until they're willing to wander into the alien realms of scripture, patristics, Christian history, because it's all terra incognita for that sect. But anyway, I gotta putting all that aside. Zizioulis is very good on that. So was Schmemann.
Mm-hmm.
The memory. By memory, what we don't mean is simply personal recollection of psychological histories. That's a small and local phenomenon within what's really the engagement of the spirit in a living and conscious community of spiritual beings within the embrace of the mind of God, which is the memory of all things. Do you know the Confessions, when Augustine's friend Nebridius dies young, and he wonders, if Nebridius, now drinking from the fountainhead of divinity and union with God, remembers me. But then he says, but of course he remembers me because he drinks from you, O God, who art the memory of all things, you are the fountainhead of all knowledge. So Nebridius is mindful of me because he is mindful of God and in God. And it's probably it's one of the loveliest moments in the Confessions for me. For all the nasty things I say about the late Augustine, which aren't nasty, they're actually,
we're right there with you.
It's lamentation for a great mind that simply got caught in the trammels of bad arguments.
Right.
Yeah. And one more thing, Michael, just because it'll be the end of memory, is that a theological, just a hero of mine, a thinker, would be Ivan Illich. But, this great recent biography by David Cayley, puts the theme of friendship central for Illich. And I think I can't deny that, like, your work in this novel on memory, but you also just do an amazing thing in there between friendship and memory, that jumped out at me. Is that a connection you're very conscious of? And could you elaborate that just for me?
You mean the fact that, again, I'm trying to avoid giving away too much of the plot, but then again, it's probably not an important thing to worry about. You mean when Oriens has been deprived of his memory?
Yeah.
But what he can't forget is the friendship he forged. Everything else becomes negotiable. The rest of his time in Egypt land, so to speak, it vanishes, but that won't vanish because the connection isn't simply a matter of recollection. It's at that point a memory of his identity. His identity. Which again then actually ties into yet another of my heretical texts that all shall be saved. But so now that you're talking to me, I realize that there are themes in this book that are fairly constant in the
there's a lot of your all shall be saved in the book, a lot of it. Go ahead, Michael. I cut you off there before.
No, just I as you guys were speaking, the thing I kept thinking about was the issue of identity that comes up here, and which is why I bring it to my students, and the hymn of the pearl to the students, and it's also, David probably knows this. It's the hymn of the pearl is also part of the scaffolding of Terrence Malick's film The Knight of Cups, which
not I think Matt Malick at his best, but okay.
but it's part of the scaffolding of this. I mean, there are even direct quotes from the hymn of the pearl.
Oh, it begins
narration.
It begins with the telling of the story of the hymn of the pearl.
Yeah, and but that really is a film about a man who's lost his identity, his awareness of who he is,
Yeah.
right? Which is, and I think it's, you know, to our theme. You know, I think this is an important issue, and I think this is what has struck me. And as I was working on Sophia in Exile, what really struck me is, wow, you know, these Gnostic texts weren't really discovered until 1947 or so, and it's almost as if they've been saved, you know, in storage until there was a culture mature enough, or at the right stage. Maybe mature is not the right word. At the right stage,
That wouldn't
to
be my
learn from it.
characterization of late modernity. I think we're
Well, mature is not the word, but at the right stage, and but by that I mean, you know, the question of a constructed reality that has nothing to do with what's real.
Well, I think that it's interesting. I mean, again, I think that, you know, again, I've been characterized as being sympathetic to the Gnostic. Actually, what I am is sympathetic to an early Christian intuition and, as I've said, pathos that's expressed variously in Paul and John in the New Testament, and various of the, well, in Clement of Alexandria's, but also that you find in things that are called Gnostic texts. I've become more and more unhappy with the very category of Gnosticism as something distinct, although I mean, obviously I'm willing to say that there was a lot of nonsense too. I mean, when Irenaeus accurately points out some of the sillier mythopoiesis of some groups, then, you know, you're moving into the realm of Scientology. You know, you realize that this is a danger of any religious culture, is it's going to have its kind of exotic ventures into metamyth, unballasted by an intelligent metaphysics. And so I'm not making apologies one way or the other. I'm saying that our picture of the early centuries has been badly distorted in many ways.
Agreed.
One is just the long theological history of forgetting the cosmology and the spiritual world within which the New Testament was written. I mean, when you go back to Paul's language, you know, many of the things that we find exotic and strange in the Gnostic documents was because they're translated differently. But the language they're using is actually Paul's language and John's language, and quite often not in a subversive way.
Right.
But, you know, at other times in a way that cuts against the grain, because, you know, Paul's not Paul and John both allow for very heavily dualistic formulae, but then within the embrace of a non-dualistic metaphysics that probably is missing from, say, a lot of Sethian traditional. So that's fine. I don't mind saying, well, this group got this wrong, this group got this wrong. But the Orthodox tradition definitely got Paul wrong. I mean, Orthodox, small o, meaning both East and West, got Paul wrong on a lot of things. You know, the late Augustine definitely got Paul drastically wrong. But also the larger tradition extracted him from the Second Temple period that he and the early apologists like Justin and the early Christians lived in, and his emphases got lost. I mean, the degree, what he understood by spirit, what he understood by flesh, what he understood by salvation, which really for him is an anastasis, you know, both a resurrection and an ascent through the spheres of the now conquered powers that separate us from God, both in a symbolic sense, but in a very much more literal sense than we today would tend to have. And so what I think has happened with the discovery of these documents, in part has been the correction of some bad scholarship. But it is, I think, true that as children of late modernity, having inherited a mechanistic metaphysics, but one that's in a sense in decay, both because it's not a useful paradigm in the sciences in many ways. I mean, I think both the life sciences and physics are there, but also because it's been so damn disastrous.
Yeah.
Not only because it's alienated us from the natural world around us, it's given us the power to destroy it on a scale. I mean, we're murdering the world. At first, our destruction of the world happened gradually enough to elude our notice, but then it turned out also to have been happening quickly enough to have escaped our control.
Yeah.
And in that world, then suddenly the Gnostic story has a different meaning in a sense. And we no longer have to think, well, are we talking about two gods here? Well, we're talking about a demiurgic reality, right? There is some governing spirit of modernity that has created a false reality, a mechanized universe, a universe that's nothing but an endless reservoir of material, dead material elements to be exploited by the acquisitive will.
Excellent,
And I
excellent.
think in that way they speak to us. Some of these texts, like I think the Apocryphon of John does. I think that the Acts of Thomas speak to us in a way that they didn't necessarily do. It has a different meaning for us, and maybe a more important one. And so, if there is, if you seem to be suggesting there's a providential aspect of their rediscovery. If nothing else, they prompt us to return to the early Christian world and say, well, wait a minute, that protest against the principalities and powers, seen from the perspective of the present, is incredibly poignantly relevant to the reality, because the encompassing reality, say, of capitalism, of the nation state, of mechanistic thinking, of what Heidegger, not a moral resource to be consulted too credulously, but nonetheless, even Heidegger recognized the age of technology, the enframing, the reduction of material existence to inert matter that is nothing more than an object of the exertions of the human will. And maybe that's in part of my fascination with the Gnostics is I think we are trapped in a false reality now, a technologically constructed machine
absolutely.
of extraordinary pervasiveness, power, and plausibility, because we've been indoctrinated into it, in which we have been entirely cut off from the real vision of things that at one time was the universal patrimony of all of humanity, pagan or otherwise, indigenous faiths, pagan faiths, early Christian, early Muslim, early, Indian or East Asian religions. This sense of belonging to a spiritual community that's also the community of nature and creation.
Right.
We've been cut off from that altogether, where our spirit was first reduced to a ghost in a machine, and then into algorithms in a computational structure or functionalist illusion. And the world has become a machine of endless production, although it's not endless. It's exhausting itself and dying. And all the beautiful spiritual mysteries that inhabit it, including the spiritual mysteries of other creatures, other ways of being conscious, other, let's say, like the way that an octopus is conscious, is being extinguished by that demiurgic monstrosity that has created this evil order of things, the capitalist, late modern, national nation state model of human existence within a mechanized, disenchanted view of human consciousness, is something that suddenly makes this Gnostic protest seem very plausible again, poignant, real. And it reminds us that this was also part of the essence of early Christianity, something obscured and occluded by bad theology, bad translation, and doctrinal authoritarianism at the worst moments. I don't mean the healthy development of dogma. I mean dogma reduced to a sterile set of propositions that are used to expel any sort of speculative or imaginative attempts to reappropriate the lost world. I'm just talking at high speed here. I'm not on cocaine, by the way. This is just
I don't think I talk very fast. One more thing for Gnosticism, Michael, you remember, and David, you might know the scholar. We had him on some weeks back, Arthur Versluis, a scholar of Gnosticism at Michigan State, and he said something that was interesting to me. And he kind of offhandedly, he was saying this thing that Vogelin and Hans Jonas are talking about, like, spirit versus matter, elite knowledge. He said, yeah, politically or something, it's probably a thing and they need to write books upon it. But he said it's not Gnosticism, right? And
Jonas had certain insights. He, of course, was working, of course, between the first and second halves of was it Spätantiker guys, Gnosis und the Nagamati documents appear, but Jonas is right about certain things. He's right about, but on the whole, yeah, he's coming out of the tradition that was. I mean, what he's doing is, in a sense, what Bauer and Neander had done in the 18th century when they tried to assimilate Gnosticism to German idealism, which is a complete category error. Is actually the reverse of the reality in many respects. But then, of course, Jonas, a heretical student of Heidegger, but Jonas is a genius. With Vogelin, he was bright, but Vogelin's use of the word gnosis and Gnosticism is just completely
confused more than illuminated. You're saying completely nuts.
It's completely useless. I mean,
I'll be honest, I hadn't used it myself so much, but when this Arthur Versluis said it,
you should have called it episteme rather than gnosis, epistemism or something. But it's definitely has nothing to do with Gnosticism in the early centuries, and it's just confusing to use the word that way. He's talking about technocracy, rule by expertise, and then he's, because of his, let's say simply, political commitments of his that I find repellent, he decides very, in a rather nasty way, to sort of throw a lot of things together as if they were all one, so that one kind of expertise that's perfectly benign suddenly gets associated with the Nazis or something.
Yeah,
so I'm not a big fan of Vogelin. I think
you should write another fantasy novel where some like arch villain is actually Eric Vogelin.
Eric Vogelin. Yeah. But again, fantasy fiction isn't really my normal métier. That's the funny thing. I wrote that book in part because I was very ill and I was trying to write myself out of my sense of helplessness. And so I think the Gnostic theme immediately made sense to me because I was trapped in a very painful, debilitating, depressing illness. And so everything looked very bleak.
And was this at the beginning of COVID, David, wasn't it?
No. The book came in two spurts, so to speak. The first was when I was in St. Louis. I wrote the book very quickly in the sense that the two halves I wrote were very quickly. They just happened to be separated by 5 years or something.
Okay.
Wow.
Because I came to Notre Dame and I immersed myself in the work I was doing here in order to make my research grants legitimate. But what happened was I in St. Louis, I wrote the first half of the book up to the point where our trio of young heroes arrive in Canopolis. To try to write myself out of a sense, I couldn't read, I couldn't concentrate, I was so miserable and so sick, but I could write. And then when I finished at NDIS and the COVID shutdown came, I couldn't work at the library. I thought this is a perfect opportunity to pull it out and finish it. And I finished the second half in about 6 weeks. So the first half was written more slowly over a period of about 2 months at the end of my stay in St. Louis.
Fascinating.
And yet it flowed, I mean, I think you'll attest, I hope, to the quality of the prose and the structure of the book. And yet there wasn't a lot of revision in it. It was there writing itself. And I think I was writing myself out of depression at the time. It's not that I would otherwise normally be just a strict realist. I'm not. I'm just saying that fantasy fiction as such, I mean, there's always something fantastical and dreamlike in whatever fiction I write. I'm not that's just, I'm always writing about dreams. I don't know why. But in the case of that book, it's a genre that, but for the situation, I might never actually have written it.
Did you have a
Fascinating.
particular audience in mind, David, when you wrote the book?
Well, obviously, you see, I'm not of the opinion that you write down to younger readers. I grew up reading
That's what I love about it. Yeah.
things like The Wind in the Willows,
Yeah.
or just even up into the 70s, Watership Down, pick up Watership Down. You would be told today that by many publishers that you can't write that prose for young readers, and yet, can you name two books that have been more loved by children?
Yeah.
Of a certain age. Now, like somewhat older children, like you said, 13. 13 is about the right age. But I also wanted to write it for adults. So there's a lot of adult satire and adult pathos in it too, I think. It's not a deep character study in the way, it's not Tolstoyan, but I think the characters are consistent at the level of the kind of narrative it's supposed to be. I think they
think
are,
so.
you know who's who from what they say.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think, going back to our part of our discussion about the contrived worlds in which we live, the technocracy, you provide these young readers with a way out of that in this book, which is what I think it's so where its value lies in a way, is you give these young readers a story to identify with, to seek what's real. And where they're not going to be able to read the Hymn of the Pearl or any of the Gnostic scriptures or anything at that sophisticated level, but this is where they are, and this is what I noticed with my son when he read it, is that I knew it would inspire him, but it gives them a key, it gives them a model for understanding the world.
Don't you think it can take them out of the left-right paradigm and put them into this notion of like?
I'm sorry,
So
You're breaking up a little, Mike.
Technocracy.
I'm sorry, you broke
I'm
up.
sorry.
I didn't hear that.
When you said it, okay. Oh, it's just when Michael was saying it gives them a paradigm. I think so. I'll try to make it more clear, not to reduce it. Is that it? We're handed a left-right paradigm that has just, I would say, very limited explanatory power. But what your novel does, David, which Michael was alluding to, is it's one that I would say, in shorthand, we're looking at Sophia versus the technostructure, or in a passage I'm looking at right now. Again, it's you have memory again. If I can I read a few of your lines, David?
Oh, well, let's see if you can.
Professor Tortoise smiled indulgently and briefly closed his eyes. Then in a more deliberate manner, he said, "It's confusing, I know, but you must believe me and not your own memories here, because I'm an expert." We all agree that's a key word there.
Yeah.
I'm an expert in these matters. Moreover, you're a child, or at least not yet quite an adult. You haven't even achieved full development in your frontal cortical lobes. By contrast, I'm an adult. I'm a priest and a psychologist and an economist. There's a lot in so many of your sentences. There's so much there, and I thank you for that. But it's this paradigm Michael is talking about. I don't want to say Michael says it the same way, but shorthand for us might be Sophia versus the technocracy, the feminine versus this, the right brain versus the left brain, something like that is a starter.
Sure. Though when you break it down into feminine, masculine, I think you have
Tricky.
the danger of trapping the masculine
Agreed.
in sins which are themselves historical developments too. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yes.
Yeah.
Because it is always the voice of women that are suppressed. You notice that Kenogaia is a sexist world too. You notice that that Laura, who's the brave and diligent, all they can ever say about her is what a pretty little girl. Condescending to her, of course.
Yeah.
She's the most lion-hearted of the characters in the book, and it's Michael who's sort of the studious, well-behaved, one who would exemplify what the girlish virtues of being a good student and all that,
Mm-hmm.
But whatever the case, yeah, I had just had a recorded conversation that'll show up on my Substack in a couple weeks with the novelist Sally Vickers, whom I think is just a wonderful novelist. Not my best performance, I have to admit. I'm a bit inarticulate and anacoluthic in my delivery because just sometimes I am. It's the circadian rhythms, you know. Sometimes I'm glib and eloquent, and at other times I talk like a tortoise chewing seaweed. But she was wonderful. You know, one of the things about her novels is that the realm of imagination, the realm of vision, and the realm of everyday experience are constantly interwoven. I mean, she's a wonderful, in one sense, very much a realist. In another sense, though, they're fairies, they're angels, they're divine visitations, always at the margins of things, and you get the whole sort of great chain of being in her fiction, the sort of principium plenitudinous. There is the natural, the preternatural. There's the angelic, the cosmic, the divine. It's all there. We're not closed. She's someone who's peering out through the cage. And she's a friend. I'm not saying this to her, so she's a wonderful person. So anyway, that'll show up a bit later. And but she was very good. I mean, she liked Kenogaia and liked the fact that it moves out of a realm of pure certitudes, you know, dogmas. And the sciences here are dogmatic as well, in fact, to the point that there are laws about how powerful a telescope can be for fear of offense. The religion is, as I say, this sort of weird, austere deism that has evolved out of. There was an earlier period in this planet's history when apparently the demiurge hadn't had quite the sort of sense of technocratic control yet that he later has developed. That she liked the fact that it moves out of the world of certitude into what she thinks at the end is more of a world of open possibility. It doesn't end.
I 100% agree with her. The image that came to me is we once went from in the Rochester diocese, a bishop who had been around for so many years, to a new one. And the vicar general at that time, and I'm not saying it's the crystallization of wisdom, he was just reminding people that, you know, the first bishop had plowed these fields and another one can plow other fields. And what, again, I see you doing is freeing up so many of our symbols, other narratives, and exactly what you're saying, just open, a multiverse as opposed to William Blake or William James block universe, right? And this is what we need as much as anything.
Another influence, by the way, William James.
Oh, good.
Learning. Yeah,
I'm glad I was sniffing that out too.
I think William James and Peirce both.
Who's the second one, David?
Peirce. Charles Sanders.
Oh
Peirce.
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Not Pierce. People often say Pierce, but he pronounced it Peirce.
Okay,
I got
you.
So one of those things you just have to know. Like it's not Anthony Powell, it's Anthony Powell for some reason.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
A different avenue back into an enchanted universe. But anyway.
But I have to say though, I think that's what I appreciate in all of your work is you're a thinker who's open, you know, who is not afraid to go where academics are afraid to go. In fact, one of the things I use from you in the classroom is it's from about 12 years ago, maybe. It's your review essay of The Secret Commonwealth that was on in First Things, and I have these college students read it, and for those of you who don't know, that The Secret Commonwealth is a book from the 17th century about the secret commonwealth of fairies and fauns and elves. And David's got this wonderful review essay of it. And I use it as an example of how to really write a review essay, but also to let the students have permission to wonder whether fairies exist. Because they haven't been given that.
This will come out in my conversation with Sally Vickers as well, where we both basically completely forgetting completely indifferent to the fact that we were being recorded, just freely admitted that, we're pretty sure they're fairies.
Yeah, well, I'm sure of it.
I know my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was a child, was talking to things in the backyard.
Yeah.
You know, and so she saw something that I lost the vision of, and this seems I don't know, it's like a perceptual thing to me.
Yeah, and as I've been thinking, we need to have a show on fairies, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, you see, actually, in fact, I will direct you to that conversation I had with her, as I say, and excuse
I look forward to it.
broken sentences and the unfinished formulations. I was just awestruck in the presence of though she's a friend, she's also a novelist I greatly admire.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
but
I'll definitely watch that.
yeah, in that I for the first time ever divulge my one unforgettable fairy experience.
Say it again.
Let's go for the second time
No.
ever.
Oh, we got to watch that one.
See,
Okay.
yeah, that was a teaser.
Okay.
So well done. So well done.
This guy knows how this
Yeah,
medium works.
you don't need a publicist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Media studies guru, David Bentley Hart.
But I actually,
Actually, my best publicists are the ones who attack me. I as I said, I have this Substack page, and it was this review in the journal formerly known as First Things. Me, I now just call it that heap of, but I won't finish it. But there was a review of my book Tradition and Apocalypse by a guy named McDermott, and it was unlike any. I mean, I've had other reviews that were tepid, some very enthusiastic, some tepid, but they'd all more or less knew what the book was about. This was just insanely wrong about everything the book said, and ridiculously hostile and condescending. And so I replied to that. But somehow, because he had reviewed the book and I replied to it on my Substack, suddenly this became a great advertisement, apparently, because I got like 400 new subscriptions in a matter of 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like begging First Things to keep attacking.
Let me have it. Yeah.
Come on, guys, I can take it.
The Bugs Bunny.
You're doing it for America, for God's sake.
I get
for
it.
the true faith, which is for you, America.
So that reminds me. So when you were at First Things, for how long was that for?
It was a good stretch of time.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly. I think, I think I printed like 150 articles.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, I mean, Richard Newhouse, he went towards the neocon sort of Republican time, but at the same time, he was still proud of his youth and his activities in the civil rights movement and marching with MLK and all that. And he didn't mind that there were diversity. He didn't mind the fact that I was a bit of a pinko and all that. And at the end of the day, I mean, I always thought of Richard as he was a priest first, and he really cared. He did care about poverty and things like that. We would have disagreements. So, and so it was uncontentious. I mean, there were other people like me who weren't neocons who were nonetheless writing for. I mean, Paul Griffiths is basically old labor, But and in fact, they even published Stanley Fish in one.
Did they?
Yeah, I remember that.
And certainly Stanley Hauerwas doesn't fit in the rock ribbed Republican category. So it was, but. So that lasted right up until, and I mean, I owe them a lot. I mean, to be honest, they did not interfere with my writing. They gave me, even after Richard passed away, they allowed me to write in my voice, which is very much my voice. And got me a following that made it possible for me to keep writing. So, I tried not, and until they started attacking me, like, 3 attacks on one book at a time, because of hurt feelings mostly. But I severed ties with them, obviously, when they started gravitating towards a politics that I find genuinely evil. I mean, I'm just the alt-right, and I didn't mind, old-fashioned conservatives and old-fashioned liberals. I could deal with both of them.
It seems it's a very different publication now.
But now I felt, but also the quality of the publication has also sunk through the floor. I mean, they used to have such rigorous standards about the quality of discourse, and now, especially, and maybe it's because the web page now drives the print journal in a way that wasn't in
Yeah.
the past. And so web culture has taken over. But I mean, they publish real trash now.
No, was it David Mills who took over after New
No,
House?
David remained chief editor under Jody Bottom, and then under Rusty for a while. Then Rusty abruptly fired him for
Yeah, I heard about that.
but almost for a certainly bad reason. And Rusty and I used to be friends, so I won't say anything more. And I think I think he's always meant well. I just think that something went wrong
Yeah,
at some
probably.
point in how he sees reality, some anger deeper than love.
Okay, sorry to hear that.
Mm.
But I think it's probably about time for us to wrap it up a little bit, David.
Yeah, you can edit that stuff out too if you want to leave out the.
I think it's all interesting. I'm not embarrassed of it.
But
Yeah.
David, this has been a real pleasure for us both. I'm sure I can say that.
Well, yeah,
And
thanks.
I would love to talk to you again at length about fairness.
Yeah, I don't think there's been enough reviews of the book yet, so I was glad for us to focus on this.
I'm afraid, I'll tell you, as I said, it was bad enough when I was a young writer and I was being told by editors that they were really impressed by my fiction, but they didn't know if there was still a market for this kind. And I was a bit of kind of like high modernist in my. But once you've written books on religion or theology, you really do have a hard time being, reviewed as anything else.
Mhm.
Well,
So I've gotten used to it, but I do think that Roland and Moonlight and this might really be the best work I've done for a long time.
Wow,
It's
good to
certainly,
hear.
well, I certainly, I mean, they're the ones closest to my sensibility. Roland, I mean, that basically is the book into which I poured myself.
yeah,
Okay, I'll have to read that. I haven't read it.
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful.
Again, I
book
work
and fun.
with in-campus ministry, and I think what you're doing with amongst many things, but the this freeing up of the whole sensibilities. You just gave people, like, you threw a lot of the tools in the air, and now people have different things, and that's of inestimable value.
I still believe I'm going to be kidnapped by a group of the new manualist Thomas one and secretly burned at a stake on the campus of Ave Maria.
They don't like me either. They're out to get me as well. That's okay.
Yeah, but you deserve it.
I do.
Right.
Well, this has been great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you again next week. Thank you, David Bentley, Hart.